Soul Simmers, welcome to the Builders Bootcamp, your ultimate training ground for learning how to build in The Sims. Whether you're a beginner or someone who's looking to level up their skills, this series will take you from the beginner tips to the pro level builds. This is the 2025 updated edition of the series that I did in 2022, since we've had quite a couple of build updates in The Sims, and it will cover everything that you need to know to create your dream builds in the game. So grab your blueprints and let's get to building. In episode 8, we are going to talk about something that a lot of people say to me that they are bad at, which is a landscaping and terrain tool. I'm gonna focus today mostly on explaining how the terrain tool works and giving you tips on what to think about when using it, and mostly giving you tips for landscaping. I hope this is gonna help elevate, no pun intended, your landscaping skills in The Sims so that you no longer feel like you are bad at it. We are back with our beautiful and stunning build, which still doesn't have any windows or doors, but for the purpose of this video, that is also not the most relevant. I'm gonna get started with the terrain tools because I feel like, one, they're the least satisfying or sexy to use in game, and secondly, then we have that out of the way and we can focus on the fun part with all the nice flowery bits. So to go into the terrain tool in The Sims 4, you're gonna navigate to this sort of pond hill looking thing with the shovel in it, which if you hover over it will also tell you that you have terrain tools. The terrain tools actually consist of a couple of different tools. The first one is called the paint tool, the second one is the eraser tool, the third one is the terrain manipulation, and the fourth one is the water tool. The water tool I'm going to skip in this video because I'm actually going to get to that in the pools, ponds, and fountains video, which will be the next episode of the Builders Bootcamp. So for today, we're going to mainly focus on the paint tool, the eraser tool, and the terrain manipulation. The paint tool actually speaks for itself. It allows you to paint the terrain. There are different types of paint. We have grass and flowers, stone and pavement, and dirt and sand. In these categories, you have a wide variety of types of sand, types of dirt, types of stone, types of flowers, etc. that you can then just literally paint onto the ground. This is a great way to do a bit more natural landscaping and just in general to give a bit more depth to your build. There are a couple of things that you can keep in mind when you are doing terrain paint or terrain tooling for that matter. And that basically is the control bar that you have here in the middle. The first one is the size of your circle. As you can see, you can, if you want to, paint really large areas at once. If you prefer to work with a square, you can also do the same and then work with a square brush. It is completely up to you or the scenario that you are painting for, which one is going to feel the most comfortable. You can switch in between by just clicking on either of them, and of course you can adjust the circle size if you want. Then you can also see that this circle consists of two different circles, or this square consists of two different squares. That is basically the softness of your brush. If you put it all the way up here, you can see that those two are basically touching, and if I click, it is just gonna fill in that square immediately. If I go to the highest softness, you will see basically that that inner square almost disappears. So if I go all the way over here, as you can see, it is actually gone. What now will happen is if I click, it does start in the middle with a little patch, but it doesn't go to the edges. If I click multiple times, it will eventually go to the edges. So this is also good to know with terrain paint in The Sims, is that the terrain layers actually stack. So if you click once, it will be a little bit. If you click twice, it will be more, 3 times more, 4 times more, if you are on the fullest softness. Something else that you can do is if you click and hold it, it will slowly fill in the entire square. The more you are to this side of your brush, the least you're gonna have to do that because the more instant the paint will be applied. Something that is good to know about the terrain paints is that most of these terrain paints don't do anything other than being aesthetic. However, with the update for Island Living, they actually made that sand is playable. Also the sand that came with the base game. So if you want to build a functional sandbox for your kids where they can build sandcastles and play in it, all you have to do is grab a patch of sand, and that could be one from the base game or one from Island Living, make a square, maybe put a cute fence around it, and bam, you have a functional sandbox for your Sims. This is the only type of terrain paint that has an additional function apart from being aesthetic. So now that we've covered the terrain paint, let's actually cover the eraser tool. And the eraser tool is very much what it is. An eraser tool. I don't know how to make it any better. I don't know how to make it sound any sexier. It just allows you to erase things. It comes with the exact same controls as your paintbrush, so you can adjust the softness and the shape. And basically, as soon as you click on it, it will just delete anything. However, what I would personally recommend you do is instead of navigating to the eraser tool, just like with deleting walls and a lot of other things in this game, if you hold control on your keyboard, as you can see, it will switch automatically. Do you see the little icon change next to my mouse? It changes into the eraser tool. So you can just hold control and use the eraser tool and then let go and paint again. You do not have to click over here and go into the eraser tool. And I would recommend you learn these things from the start by using keyboard shortcuts, because it's going to speed up your build process so much. And I can speak from experience that if you learn it the wrong way, I'm not saying it's wrong, but if you learn it one way, it's going to be really hard to switch your ways later down the line. So pick now, choose wisely, make sure that you pick the one that you think is gonna bring you the most joy in building. My personal recommendation would be to start with your keyboard shortcuts as soon as possible. Now that we have the terrain paint out of the way, which is by far the most easiest in the terrain tool, we're gonna get into terrain manipulation. And terrain manipulation, I think, is one that a lot of people are scared about. And I have to admit, for a really long time, I was also scared about terrain manipulation. I was not good at it. It always looked a bit silly. So don't worry, you are definitely not the only one, but I got you covered today in explaining what all of these tools do and how you can use them to create beautiful terrains in The Sims. So we're gonna start with the basic controls on the left. Again, you have that circular and square shape that allow you to basically just control what kind of shape or what kind of brush you want to be using with on this canvas. Then there is the softness again, so you can go into the circular one, make it a bit smaller, adjust the softness, so you'll see that inner circle change again, and that again is exactly the same as the terrain paint. But then there is an extra slider that is called speed. My personal recommendation for this would be, especially if you're new to using the terrain tool, is make sure that you're always at least below 50% of the speed. Preferably maybe even lower, because I'll show you if you're on the lowest speed and you click once, this is how much it elevates. If you are on the fastest speed and you click once, this is how much it elevates. The terrain tool is one of those tools in The Sims that over time you get better at controlling it. But when you don't have the control yet, don't let the game control it for you, because that is going to end in disaster and weird hills. I would suggest starting with the slider either on just under 50% or maybe even all the way down. That way things are going to go a lot slower, making it way easier for you to control what you're doing. So let me put that slider at about 35 to 40%. That's usually a comfortable level for me to work with. And then we are going to go over the tools that you can see here. The first one is raising the terrain. This is actually very straightforward. It does exactly what you expect it to do. It raises the terrain. You can see that as long as I keep clicking, it will just continue to add. It will always add from that middle point where you click. So just keep that in mind if you're trying to figure out how that works basically, and how it sometimes also goes a bit uneven. That is because if you would want it to be super even, you would need to make sure that your mouse really stays in the same point, which is almost impossible because every time you click, your mouse will jump a little bit because the terrain goes up. Then the second one is lowering the terrain. So you can actually make a big hole in the floor if you wanted to as well. And it tells you if you hover over it that if you hold control, it will actually reverse the effect. So again, here you don't technically even need any of these two tools. You can just hold control and you can be like, okay, up, ooh, that's a bit too much, let's go down, up, up, down, 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 up, 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 down, down, down. I'm saying the wrong words with the arrows, but you know what I mean? You can get pretty creative with this. As you can see, eventually, when you are working with the terrain tool a lot, it is really hard to see what part of the terrain has been affected. This is where I would highly suggest that you turn your grid on by pressing G on your keyboard. If you are in the terrain tool, the grid will always be at the ground floor, so it doesn't matter if you have all the floors up or all the floors down, it will always be at the ground floor because that's where you're working with the terrain tool. The parts where the grid is yellow are the parts of the lot that are flat. The parts where there is no yellow are the parts where the lot is not flat. And this is something that it might seem not super important, especially on the edges here. You're like, but that's smooth enough, right? However, sometimes your Sims will have routing issues or say that they are not able to walk somewhere if the elevation is too steep or if there are too much hills. Sometimes objects will look weird and floating because the floor isn't actually flat. So make sure that you know how to turn on that grid so you can check if your terrain is actually flat. So now that you have seen how to raise the terrain, lower the terrain, and check if your terrain is flat, it is time to go into the smooth the terrain one. And I feel like the smooth the terrain one is going to help you a lot in making sure that your first efforts at terrain tooling will look a bit better. I still use the smoother all the time, but I feel like especially when you're new to the terrain tool, the controls can feel a bit clunky sometimes, and your hills get a little bit higher than you prefer, and your holes in the ground get a little bit deeper than you prefer. And with smoothing out the terrain, that's going to save you a lot. So for the smoother, I would always suggest using the lowest speed. Anything above the lowest speed is going to be way too fast. What it basically does, it takes the highest point and the lowest point, and it will smoothen out the transition in between the two. So over here, we have our flat floor and we have our peak. If we start smoothing, as you can see, it will also lower that peak a little bit. It will raise the floor here a little bit. So as you can see, all the way to here, there's no longer any flat terrain, just so that that peak and the curve can get smoothened. If we go from this lower point and we go up, as you can see, it will basically bring up that lower point, smoothen it out a lot. And this is why that speed adjustment is so incredibly helpful, because if this goes too quick, you basically end up with a flat ground. Or that's at least what it's going to feel like. This way, as you can see, you can have some terrain elevation here. You can have like a little bit of a pit over there. But what it still does is it creates like this smooth landscape. This doesn't flatten it though. This is something that I think a lot of people think is like, oh, I'll just go in with a smoother and I'll try to smooth out the terrain as long as I can. And they're like, it's not getting any flatter. The game is basically just smoothing out the height differences. That's all that's happening. But as you can see, I've just created that this entire part of the lot is no longer straight. If you want to make your lot straight again, I would suggest that you use the one all the way at the end, which is just flatten lot. Flatten lot is basically your reset button. This will allow you to go back to your original state of the lot with everything being flat. As you can see, this lot by default is not entirely flat. So now that the lot is back to the default state, it is time to move on to our next two tools, and that is flatten terrain and flatten to height. And I feel like I should create a little hill just so that I can show you the difference here. So the flattened terrain, basically what it does is the little square in the middle will move up with the terrain. As you can see, it moves up with the terrain. And then as soon as you select a height and you click, it will flatten the terrain at that exact height. However, this height needs to be existent already. So I can move it along this hill, I can move it on the floor, but I cannot go any higher than the highest point. But let's say that I'm like, ooh, I actually really like to have this big platform. I might want to make like a big hill where I can build a house on, but I want it to be higher than what I have now, but I want it to be flat, so I don't want to go here and then raise it up again because then everything's going to get uneven. Then you're going to select the flatten to height. So the flattened terrain uses existing height. The flatten to height uses customizable height. So as you can see right now, the little square is basically just on the ground floor. If I go into this hill, it is still on the ground floor and it will move everything down to that level. By using the control and the square bracket, you can raise this up and raise this down. It will literally tell you, by the way, if you hold this tool, it will tell you how to adjust this. There is also a height slider over here that you can use, but I personally like to control it with the square bracket keys because one, you can do it while you're using the tool, and two, it is a little bit more intuitive because you can go like per step. But this is great for when you're trying to like create a tiered mountain, or when you're trying to like, I don't know, create different height levels. You can select the height first and then just flatten to that height. Something that is nice from this point is as soon as you have those three tiers and you want to make sure that all three tiers have a nice landing platform, you can use that flattened terrain again and basically go from here to kind of make that the terrain around it is flat on that same height. As you can see, this kind of borks because I'm using the round tool, so this would be the time to adjust to the square tool simply for a bit more control. And then let's say that I want to have an equal platform on all sides. Let's see if I can do that like this. Okay, there we go. And then for this one, again here, it's so incredibly clutch to have the the grid on because it just tells you what you're working with. And as you can see, I've accidentally created some squares that I didn't mean to. So then I'll probably just go for the smallest size, use the smoothen terrain like this to just smoothen it out a little bit on the sides everywhere. I think that will just look better in general. Make sure that I also keep the original squaring intact, and there we go. We now have 3 perfectly flat platforms, which would allow us to place stairs in between it as well. This is something that I can explain to you, the tools that you can use, but for a big important part, you are gonna have to practice with playing around with the terrain tool. My advice would be, don't go on the fastest settings, take it slow. That allows you for much more control. Familiarize yourselves with the different types of terrain tools. Don't be afraid to flatten the lot and just go back. As you can see, I flattened everything, but because I've added stairs, this part deleted or like stayed. As soon as I delete those stairs, that will actually go away as well. But don't be afraid to flatten the lot in between if you feel like you are not on the right track. Play around with it, and also play around with this before you actually start building anything. But just train yourself. Go to a 64x64 lot and allow yourself full control of this terrain tool to just experiment, familiarize yourself with the feeling of using it, and don't be afraid to slowly start adding little bits of terrain manipulation into your build, like making a custom pond or maybe making like a little flower hill or anything. And then once you get more comfortable, you can get a lot more creative with your builds. Something that is important to note if you want to make a house that is up on a hill is make sure that you first do the terrain tools, or like specifically the terrain manipulation, and then place your structure on it. Because I can tell you from experience, let's say that we've built this beautiful house and we say, actually, it would be super cool if there was a big hill up here and the house could be on a hill. As soon as the house is there, you can't really terrain tool anymore. Like, it will just go around the house. So, yeah, this will just create a hill around the house. It won't actually raise the house up. I think this is something that a lot of people don't realize when they first start working with the terrain tool, is if you want to have your house up on the terrain, start with the terrain manipulation first and then put your house on there. I think that covers all of our terrain tools. Again, I know that the terrain tools are one of those things in The Sims that a lot of people feel like they don't want to get started with because they don't really understand the tools. I hope that in this video, I have explained it well so that you at least understand what all these controls in this panel do and what every single one of these tools is supposed to do. Hopefully from there, you can start practicing and you can get absolutely amazing at terrain manipulation. I just know it, but I hope this video was helpful and that you feel comfortable enough practicing after. Now that we have terrain manipulation and terrain paint out of the way, let's actually get into the fun part, and that is landscaping. Something that I think a lot of people struggle with when it comes to landscaping in The Sims is feeling like they need to fill the entire lot. This is something that I'm still very guilty of doing, because there is this white line when you're in build mode that just signifies the end of your plot, and it feels like if you don't put anything around the edges, etc., that it's gonna look really weird. Where in reality, if you actually go all the way to the edges of the lot all the time, as soon as you're in gameplay mode, this white line disappears, and you'll just have a nice field of green with a random bush in between. So try to think of landscaping as something that lives, as something that feels organic and feels natural, which very rarely looks very landscaped, so to say. Unless obviously you want to give your Sims a very landscaped garden, then your approach might be a bit different. But if you're just trying to have the build blend into the world better, so that the lot around the house doesn't feel so empty, you don't actually have to go in super extensive landscaping. My first tip for this would be look at the world around your house. As you can see, the houses around here, there are a lot of this similar tree. So let's actually just select base game because we are in a base game world. So I just want to see the base game things. And then let me get that tree that we see everywhere, this one. If I use this tree in this build, it will automatically help this build fit into the world because it's just gonna mimic what you already see around it, making it feel like it's part of the rest of the environment. Something else that I can see is that they're using this specific bush quite a lot, which actually is a bush that we have at our disposal as well. This one is a little bit darker. If you've done the holiday event, you also have one with lights in it. There is a lighter version of the bush in debug, However, since we haven't covered any gaming cheats or building cheats, I am not gonna go too much into debug right now, but just know that for landscaping specifically, the debug items of The Sims are gonna come in super clutch because most of them are actually free. So that means that your landscaping will be free, bringing the value of your lot drastically down. And most of them actually come in slightly different swatches than the default ones we have in game. So I hear you think, but Ro, what is debug exactly? What does that mean? All the items that you will see in the world around your Sims are either called debug and live edit objects. Debug objects are things that your Sims can actually interact with. So they have some gameplay tied to it. Let's say that your Sim is cooking a meal. You'll see them whip up this bowl and a spoon that they're cooking with. That's a debug item. You normally don't have it in the game, you can't use it in the build mode, but your Sim has these objects when they're actually performing a specific action. That's called a debug item. A live edit item is basically anything that you can see in the world around your Sims. So this house here is a live edit item. This tree here, live edit item. This bridge here in the back, live edit item. Originally, all of these items were not accessible to us players. They were basically in the backend code of the game and they were there, but no one could use them. I think it was about 4 years ago where The Sims actually decided to make all of these items available to people, but you do have to enter some longer cheats in the right order to get them. These things are not organized into the catalog, so you'll basically just get a really long list of items that aren't categorized, that don't have logical names, and you're just gonna have to scroll through it to find the items that you want. Obviously, there are modders who have fixed this, which I will talk about in our very last episode of this series, which will be all about building mods. But if you are not in a position to download mods or you don't want to download mods, you're gonna have to rely on simply just using the cheats. I will get to that in the specific episode about cheats because I feel like there are quite a lot of building cheats, and considering that this cheat is not an easy one to enter, I won't cover it in this episode. But at the same time, it also feels really weird not mentioning debug landscaping at all because I know that at this point it's become quite a staple of landscaping. So if you're seeing one of your favorite simmers online doing beautiful landscaping and they're using all these free plants that look slightly different than the ones that you have in your base game, don't worry, we're gonna get to that in an episode, but that is what we call debug or live edit landscaping. That doesn't change how you want to landscape though, because it will still use the same objects as you see in the world around you, and it will still follow the same strategy, so let's actually continue with that. So now that we found the tree and the bush, I also see that there are quite some flowers around. So let's go into the flower category. Also, for anyone wondering, I went into the outdoor plant category over here by just clicking on the tree. Then we have trees, shrubs, flowers, and rocks that we can use to landscape with. And let's get some cute flower bushes that we can use, like different sizes, maybe different heights as well, so that we can get a bit more creative. Something that I would advise when it comes down to landscaping in The Sims is make sure that you have a couple of color pops. Make sure that you have a couple of lower bushes, so things that you can actually kind of use as a taller version of the grass on the plot. Make sure that you have some shrubs and make sure that you have some trees. I feel like as soon as you have your palette together, it is time to start landscaping. Something that you'll notice in The Sims is you can actually place shrubs and stuff relatively close to each other, but you can't always place them as close as one might want. So if you want to get more creative with your landscaping, there is actually one cheat that I will teach you today. Because without this cheat, in my personal opinion, landscaping becomes almost impossible. I have talked about this cheat in a prior episode as well, so it might sound familiar, but what you're going to do is you're going to press Ctrl-Shift-C on your keyboard, and then you're going to type bb.moveObjects space on, and then hit enter. The game will tell you if it actually succeeded. The game will tell you if the cheat is on. If it didn't tell you anything, then you probably made a typo and feel free to just try again. If at one point you want to turn this cheat off, you can just type bb.moveObject space off and then press enter, and it will tell you that it turned this cheat off. To get out of the cheat menu, you just press escape and it will go away again. Now you can see that we can actually intersect all of the plants without issue. This is exactly what BB Move Objects does. It allows you to intersect options without issue. The reason that this is not enabled by default is because if you can endlessly intersect objects, obviously that could disturb the gameplay. So by default, The Sims didn't want everyone to be able to do this, but it's a pretty easy cheat, and it's also a very well-used cheat, so you might have heard your favorite creator talk about it before. So now that we get to landscaping and we've looked a bit around the world, we can see that this tree is usually by itself. So let's make sure that this tree is on the lot at least twice, or maybe even 3 times. We could add one over here, and then maybe we can move that one a little bit over there. There can be one a bit closer to the house. I think that is actually pretty nice. Then I feel like these bushes would be kind of cute in the front over here, but as you can see, they are not the perfect size. They like stick out a little bit, and that personally frustrates me. So I am going to teach you another neat little trick that we will also get to when we get to the interior decoration episode. So actually, funnily enough, interior decoration and landscaping do share a lot of similarities in terms of how to approach it. But what you're going to do is you're going to grab this item, then you're going to press either of the square brackets on your keyboard. You can size them up and size them down with that square bracket. So if I size it down once, it still doesn't really perfectly fit here, which obviously isn't ideal, but it fits a little bit better. Maybe I'm gonna size it down even more. And now as you can see, it perfectly fits over there, and it doesn't perfectly fit over here, but that is why the BB Move object is so nice. So we sized it down twice, and now we can just intersect them to make sure that it perfectly connects. Something that you'll also notice me doing a lot when we're going to go into the landscaping now, when you grab something in The Sims, you can actually place it on the grid. However, that's not always where you want to place it. Maybe you want to place it a little bit to the left, a little bit in the middle. As soon as you hold Alt on your keyboard, you can actually free place an item. So it no longer snaps to the grid, which allows for much more precise placement. If I look at landscaping a lot like this, what I usually look at is make sure that I have landscaping around the house itself. I think this is very natural. A lot of real houses have this as well, where they'll have just plants growing alongside the bottom of the house. So I usually like to start with that by just like placing a couple of these low-lying bushes, because they are perfect for being in front because they're a lot lower than any of the other bushes we have in the game. And this is just gonna be a general landscaping tip. You always want to layer. So if you think that you have enough landscaping, get a couple more plants. There is almost no such thing as too much landscaping in The Sims. Obviously, if you start, trying to decorate your entire lot, yes, there is something as too much landscaping. But it helps a lot if you layer your plants, because that will make it seem a lot less sparse. So now that we have our little front row and we have the taller plants in the back, it is actually time to start filling that in with the flowers. And I'm going to use this taller one to kind of cover this corner because there currently wasn't any plant there. And then I'm going to use this lower bush to kind of fill this space in here. I'm going to make sure that I have these like flowers spread out a little bit. This one is also a bit big, so I'm just going to size it down. And something that also helps is repeating the same flowers that you've used before. That way you create a sort of cohesion that will make people feel like it is landscaped in a sensible way, because often you don't have a lot of different flowers. In this case, I feel like the pink is a little bit too pinkish, so I might actually change it out for this purple, which I think looks super cute. Then we can actually do the same on the other side. So let's actually get this low-lying bush again. Let's make sure to rotate it as well, so it's not all like the same way, the same placement, because that's gonna start to look boring as well. We can get this flower. Let's make it a bit smaller. I hope that you can see what I'm doing here. I am basically just trying to repeat and like layer as much as I can. And it is just one of those things where, to a degree, landscaping is a lot of rinsing and repeating. Like, first you figure out which plants you want to use, then you figure out what color scheme you want to go for, and then you just repeat that. So in this case, I repeat that around this corner of the house as well, maybe this corner. And then I would just make sure that all of it looks a bit landscaped. Maybe I would use the terrain tool to go in here, and I could use the, let's go for this one, and then I can go for that one. Let's make sure that that's the same width. Let's turn on the grid so I can actually see what I'm doing. Let's make sure that we have a bit of a softer brush so that the edges aren't as harsh. There we go. Now we have a cutesy little pathway. And then something that I also like to do is For me, landscaping is always a way to mark spaces. So it's almost like a natural fence. So if I have a pathway like this, I will use these bushes to kind of line the pathway because that feels, again, like very natural landscaping. In this case, I think it might actually look better if they're a bit smaller. Also, if you're placing an item and you hold shift while you place it, it will automatically duplicate it so that you can place it again. This is something that I sometimes even forget when I'm building, and then you have to like go back and you have to, I don't know, like copy the item again, and just saves you time if you hold shift straight away. Also, as you can see here, by default, this placed in like a bit of an awkward position next to the path. So what I do is just I grab it, I hold Alt, and then I move it inwards to kind of line my path. Again, I am very much using landscaping to line my lot. So I'm lining the house, I'm lining the walkways. If we were to do like a backyard in here, I would grab like a nice fence. Let's get a taller one that I can place, I don't know, like so. There we go, beautiful backyard. Then probably what I would do to make this feel a little bit more alive is I would get this same hedge, like I said, very much rinse and repeat. And then for this one, to make sure that I don't have to place a million small hedges, I would probably go in, size it down once, because I feel like the default one of this hedge is always a bit too big. And then just kind of go in and again, line my fence with it, because stuff like that feels very realistic. It's gonna give your lot that sort of green look without having to really think about your landscaping and the style. Of course, if you want to do a very lush, overgrown lot or garden, your landscaping is going to look vastly different from what I'm doing right now. You're not going to perfectly line everything. You're probably going to go in there and just spam the hell out of all those plants, which again, you're going for a very different style then. So now I'm just trying to like kind of go for the most basic suburban landscaping. This is one of those situations where I'm like, actually my landscaping ends a bit weird, like this bush doesn't go around the corner. So then I'm gonna go in and I'm gonna see if I have any other bushes that like could potentially sort of fill that connection between the two. And I think this tall bush is perfect for that. And then maybe I can use this low laying bush that I've been using already to kind of connect the two. As you can see, this lot is already coming together nicely in terms of landscaping. Something that I see in the environment that we haven't really used is a combination of some stones. So let's actually get some different stones in here and let's place those. And then there are some flowers growing in between it, so we can mimic that as well. Again, the world around your lot is basically just a big cheat sheet. Something that I might do is actually move this tree in here. I always like to have stones and flowers more towards the bottom of a tree. I feel like that is a bit more natural, maybe having it standing randomly in the middle of the backyard. And then something that I think would also help is if the trees are not all the same size. So maybe I'm gonna grab this one and size it down a little bit and move it a bit more into the front yard. I think this landscaping is already coming together super nicely and I like it a lot. Then something that I like to do as a last step for my landscaping to really give it some life is I like to go into the terrain paint, into the dirt and sand category, select a circle brush, go to one of the smaller ones and make it really soft. And then I like to grab one of these dirts and I like to kind of go over it and shade a little bit underneath and then fill it in so that the landscaping actually looks like there is some dirt growing underneath. This doesn't have to be super even, so you don't have to go in and make sure that like everything is super smooth. But stuff like this is gonna create like the illusion of a shadow, which is just going to make your build and your landscaping feel so much more alive and so much more real. So I'm now just going around here as well, making sure that sort of that shadow is everywhere. And again, like I said, this doesn't have to be even. Actually, the less even as it is, the more realistic it seems. It does help if you're on like a setting of the brush that is a lot smoother so that it doesn't like immediately apply the darkest shade of this terrain paint. But there you go. That's it. That would be my tip to landscape this lot. As you can see, this already looks super cozy. You can use this in any world that you're playing in. Just look at the landscaping around it and start from there. As soon as you feel comfortable with more basic landscaping like this and you feel like you can landscape a house so that it fits into the environment, you can get a bit more creative of maybe like looking at an overgrown fairy cottage and, you know, kind of trying to replicate that. Just like you're using the world in The Sims as the inspiration, you can totally do this with real life pictures textures as well. If you don't feel comfortable landscaping, and I would say the same for creating floor plans, if you don't feel comfortable doing something in The Sims like from scratch, just look up examples and recreate it. A really big part of getting better at a skill in The Sims is just copying something from real life and trying to recreate it in The Sims. And the more that you do that, the more insight you will create in what works and what doesn't work with landscaping in The Sims. Because apart from following literal rules that other people have created in architecture about what works and what doesn't work in landscaping IRL, there are also things that just work or don't work in The Sims specifically. There are certain types of houses I will never build in The Sims, like a very simple square house with a roof exists in real life and will look probably perfectly fine, but in The Sims it will just not look interesting enough and it will look boring and like an unfinished build. So for you to experiment with stuff like this and understand what from real life can you take into The Sims and what will work is just something that you can only learn by doing it a lot. So I hope that this series can help you overcome those first steps of I don't know where to start. But as soon as you know where to start, just play around with this. Just like with the terrain tool, allow yourself to get better at landscaping bit by bit, and I genuinely believe that you can all become wonderful landscapers. That was this episode on terrain tool and landscaping. As always, if you have any questions, feel free to hop into the comments and I'm more than happy to help you. If this episode taught you anything new, let me know in the comments down below as well what it was, because I'm always curious to learn what people are taking away from these series. And of course, toss it a cheeky like if it was helpful to you, because that really helps the video get to more people and hopefully help other people discover the Builders Bootcamp as well. And lastly, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and notification bell so you won't miss episode number 9 of the Builders Bootcamp, which will be all about ponds, fountains, and pools. And with all of that being said, thank you so much for watching and I'll see you on the next one. Bye everyone!